Tonight, we are honored to have with us Mary Gaitskill. She is one of the great writers of her generation and of our time. I mean that in all sincerity. Those phrases are usually hyperbolic or nonsensical, or both. But in Mary Gaitskill's case, they are simply accurate and fitting and deserved. She has earned this place of respect through her work, the precision of her words, the scope of her vision, and the tenacity with which she has pursued it. We just had a Q&A with the fiction graduate students, and many of us have read The Devil's Treasure, the most recent complete book. And it's just been a pleasure to read that, because in addition to getting to hear her inimitable voice in my head again as I read the new essayistic portions of the book, I've also gotten to read anew scenes from so many of her past works of fiction that she's interwoven along with a fairy tale. In the process, she's created a kind of sui generis, I guess it's actually not sui generis because there's Nick Flynn's book before him, but in any case, what struck me is a sui generis book. For writers, it's a kind of masterclass, not in the writing craft of writing, but in the psychic craft of it. The sources of the determination to write, the need to do it, how the visions that trouble us can at times be at least partially soaked up by writing, the blindnesses and self-delusions that writing allows and even feeds off of, while eventually or even at the same time undoes. All those contradictory, messy, disowned strivings and longings that push writers forward, they aren't just on display in this book, they are, with Mary Gaitskill's often stunning accuracy, captured. So first, just take a paragraph from her novel, Two Girls, Fat and Thin, quoted in the book, that describes the young female narrator attending a local basketball game with her parents. Quote, "The auditorium was hot and muggy, full of muffled, senseless noise and strangers with invulnerable, gum-chewing faces. Sweating men ran with meaningless urgency, straining to prevent each other from doing something that changed from moment to moment. Strangers sat on benches, roaring at intervals. My father sat with his neck stretched forward, his face set in the expectant, placated look he had when the world was forming a pattern he approved of," unquote. I won't, as I am tempted to do, wax pedantic about the understated rigor here, the rhythmic patterning, the parallel constructions, the cumulative power of the alliteration, etc. For all I know, Mary simply has a great ear and gave these things no conscious thought, and I'm only hearing them because I'm teaching a class on sentences. But it is there, and it has an undeniable effect. In this instance, that power is put to one of her most characteristic ends, at least to my mind, to defamiliarize. To take what we think we have seen 100 times before and know intuitively, a basketball game, and turn it instead back into the actual sense data of experience, shorn of the illusion of coherence that most of us daydream through life believing is real. She does what strong writers do. She saves the world back for us from the oblivion of cliche so we can experience it newly and have it returned to us as a gift. Not a simple, pleasing gift, but a gift of clear seeing. Second, take this shorter paragraph from one of the first-person commentary sections of The Devil's Treasure, where Mary Gaitskill is talking about this activity of seeing. "I always stop to look, and often I write what I see, or I try to. Usually I fail because my mind isn't big enough to understand what I see or to contextualize it at all. But sometimes I get a bit of it. You could describe it as an artistic impulse or a prideful impulse, or both. You might at first mistake this for a humble brag. My mind isn't big enough to understand or contextualize it all. Come on, of course your mind's big enough. You're Mary Gaitskill. But this would be to get the sentiment exactly wrong and miss what she is saying about writing. First, you look. You have to look. It's an absolute requirement to observe. Then you try. Without effort, there is nothing. Then mostly you fail. If you don't know this about your own work, you're doomed. And yes, sometimes here and there you get a bit of it. But remember, this isn't just an artistic impulse, which sounds so generally positive and benign, but also a prideful impulse. The writer's urge to give the world back to the reader, stripped of cliche, isn't only a gift, it's a demand that you listen to her, the writer, that you see this. And that, yes, it's important enough that you should see this and not a million other things you could be seeing or doing. There is pride in that. And all I can say is, thank goodness Mary Gaitskill has fought to maintain enough of that pride to keep writing for the last 40 years. We are all richer for it. Please welcome Mary Gaitskill.
Thank you, Adam. Is this the right position? Right. You can hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. I have a lot to say about that, but you can talk about it on the Q&A. I'm going to read tonight from a work in progress. It's a sequel, or if you don't like that word, a continuation of a novella that I published in the New Yorker a few years ago. I think it's free online. It's called This Is Pleasure. It was also published in a small book, but I don't think that's available anymore. It is free online, I believe. This Is Pleasure is about a man named Quinn, a British gentleman living and working in New York City, very successful publisher, who during Me Too was accused of misconduct, bordering on abuse, stuff like pinching people, saying weird things, spanking people. And that story was narrated by Quinn and his friend Margot Berland. What I'm going to read is a more complex narration because there are more than two voices. And just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to indicate who's speaking by saying their names. I'm going to read a little bit of the end of This Is Pleasure. At that moment, Quinn is walking down the street. He's been totally destroyed. He's lost his job. He might lose his wife, but he's feeling distraught, but he's feeling pretty confident that he could triumph in the end. And so I'm just going to read that little bit from This Is Pleasure, and then I'm going to segue into the new piece, which is called And This Is Pain. Life is big enough for any story. I walk in the street with tears running down my face. I walk in a world of sales racks and flavored refreshments, marching crowds, broken streets, and steam pouring through the cracks. Jackhammers, roaring buses, women striding into traffic, knife-like in their sharp high heels, past windows full of faces, products, bright admonishments, light and dust. Slouching employees smoke in doorways, waiters clear outdoor tables. Eaters lounge before empty plates, legs spread, working their phones. Vividly colored drinks, wine, bread. Flocks of pigeons, a careful rat. At this newsstand, I know the proprietor. He catches my eye and tactfully registers my tears with the slightest change in his expression. Deep in his cave of fevered headlines and gaudy faces, he shivers with cold and fights to breathe. His lungs are failing as he sells magazines and bottled waters, mints, and little basil plants. We greet each other. I don't say, but I think, hello, brother. Life rushes by. On the corner, people play instruments and sing. Sullen men sit with filthy dogs and beg. In the subway, a hawk-nosed boy with dyed, stringy, somehow elegant hair squats and manipulates crude puppets to sexy music amid a weird tableau of old toys. There is something a little sinister in him. He looks up with a pale, lewd eye. An older woman laughs a little too loudly, trying to get his attention. A beggar looks at me and says, "Don't be so sad. It'll get better by and by." And I believe him. There will be something else for me. If not here, then in London. I can feel it. I am on the ground and bleeding, but I will stand up again. I will sing songs of praise. The beggar laughs behind me, shouts something I can't hear. I turn, $1 ready in my hand. The first thing I remember on waking is the laughing beggar, angry laughter that clashed with his gentle words. What were the words? I open my eyes. The stars overhead are plentiful and bright. I sense the presence of animals. I tried to help the beggar because I could hear the pain inside, the anger at me, but also at himself for saying something kind, for having a human feeling towards a privileged white man passing him on the street in a beautiful suit. Of course, he had to suppress that, disguise it with mockery. If only he knew how much it meant to me, what power his words held in the moment. I tried to give him the dollar first because his first kind impulse had inspired me, helped me. Don't look so sad. That's what he said. Yes, and it will get better. And there were birds flying up from somewhere right at the moment I turned, dollar in hand. People screamed, and there was a terrible blow to my head. When I woke, the beggar was gone, and I was on a stretcher being shelved into an ambulance with an, at first, inexplicable vision streaming before me along the crude, kind faces of the EMTs and the fascinating chamber of the conveyance. An image of myself as a young boy, rising up through swirling water, fist outstretched, a childhood fantasy, aqua boy to the rescue, of power and goodness that almost made me weep. I indulge the fantasy that I enjoy most because it may come true. Vanity Fair commissions an impartial exploration of my case that unexpectedly reveals the truth that dozens of people, women, would come forward to say how kind I was to them, how I had helped them. I imagine them on television testifying calmly before the kind and handsome anchorwomen of the most liberal news outlets. I imagine my childhood fantasy self, Aqua Boy, swimming through the swirling floodwater, coming to save the prettiest girls in class. I recall the beggar's words with emotion and belief. Yes, he saw it. I will be vindicated in spite of everything. Margot. The disaster bloomed and spread. It climbed every available wall. Articles appeared in every New York City paper with pictures of Quinn looking like a simpering aristocrat or simply a pervert, including one where he fatuously clowned, purse-mouthed and blurry-eyed, with what looked like a fly swatter in his hand and a plaid ice pack on his head. I was in one of them, the reluctant accomplice, arms stiffly folded, smile wan, eyes elsewhere. I look like a jaded, cynical hag, I said to Todd. You don't look like a hag, he answered judiciously. More women came forward. A girlfriend from 30 years past published an essay about him, describing how the involvement had scarred her. More former friends stopped returning calls. Quinn was actually asked to leave a restaurant he'd frequented for years, or rather the maitre d' materialized to inform him that he was no longer welcome there when he arrived to claim his reservation. Poor Carolina couldn't stop looking online, where the bang for blood was deafening, where there was apparently a picture of him in a beautiful suit with a turd photoshopped over his face. Finally, Quinn ran, first to London, where he hoped to find allies among old school chums, family friends, which looked to work out until this girl materialized. Someone from his past. Something had gone on between them when he was young and she was much younger. Anyway, she moved in the same circles, and all at once there was real awkwardness. The few allies he had found expressed their understanding in hushed tones and nerveless shoulder pats while seeing him to the door. Some offered general encouragement. It's impossible to imagine you won't land on your feet. Just stick it out and stay around, even while making it clear that there was no position available now or in the immediate future. Only one, a quote, nice, well-bred old hog, close quote, invited him out to dinner and told him with friendly hoggish bluntness, face it, man, your goose is cooked. Then they spent over an hour eating a robust meal and exploring the possibility of a memoir about humiliation and disgrace. Quinn claimed to find this fascinating. He spent the last week of his visit home with his younger brother, at the family cottage in Cotswold, which is the high point of the trip. The low point being the encounter later that evening with his father, who embraced him with painful love and regaled him with stories of Klaus von Bülow, an aristocrat who had probably murdered his wife, and advised him to redeem himself with good works, preferably abroad. He came back to New York plainly more shaken than he would admit, and after a long, horrible discussion with Carolina, made arrangements to renovate and rent out the lower floor of their apartment. Then he ran again, this time in a gleaming, beautifully outfitted truck, to various places in the States where he still had friends he could shelter with or visit. I was at first inundated with excited, emoji-laden text describing the beauties of this or that place or the niceness of his Airbnb hosts. What a great opportunity this was. Then there were days of silence which would just become concerning when he would finally send another flurry of texts trailing rambunctious comets of discordant emojis. I had lunch with a good friend of his, a restaurant owner he'd met when he first arrived in New York, a big bald-headed guy who'd done a lot of amateur boxing in his youth, resulting in a complexly broken nose. His name was Lewis, and he was Quinn's physical opposite to such a degree that I wondered if the sheer delight of the contrast might be part of the reason that Quinn had kept the friendship so close over the years. His face was heavy, with a curved, opinionated mouth, a prominent, large-boned forehead, and quick eyes with an unexpectedly innocent center even under their saggy, saturnine lids. In spite of its crude features, it was a sensitive face, and his spectacularly twisted nose gave it an extra expressive dimension. He was appalled at Quinn's hightailing it, almost to the point of contempt. "He should stay and fight," declared Lewis. "That's the only way he's going to get any semblance of his life back." "Lewis," I said, "Quinn is not a fighter. It's not his nature. He's a persuader, a seducer, and I don't think that's going to help him now. And anyway, what could he do that might actually be effective? Anything would be better than what he's doing now. He should fight with words, go on a radio talk show. He should write something." As he spoke, I could see why Quinn enjoyed him. Even eating and talking, he exuded the pride of sparring, feinting, looking for an opening. He was just sitting there with a fork, but I imagined him with fists up, chin tucked, forehead ready to think or butt as required. I said, "Well, he was talking about staging a play based on what happened, really more of a performance piece from his side of it," which no one does anymore, I didn't say. "He knows at least one person in theater who still speaks to him." "That sounds like a great Hail Mary move. Why haven't I heard about it?" "Because he's probably not going to do it. Carolina doesn't want him to do it. She said she'd divorce him." "Oh, for Christ's sake, she'll lose all respect for him if he lets her dictate like that, if she hasn't already." "Well, she also said he can't do it or shouldn't do it with a court case pending, and she's right. It would be crazy. So she's talking divorce." Lewis sighed. He took off his napkin and threw it down. "I predict that if he doesn't do something to stand up for himself and her, she will divorce him." And it turned out he was right, at least about the last part. Julie K. For a long time, I didn't understand why I hated Quinn Saunders so much. I barely knew him, even though I'd known him a little for years. We'd see each other at publishing events, sometimes at a party held by a mutual acquaintance. A couple of times we had lunch together. It was during one of these lunches, not alone, that strange woman, Margot Berland, was there, that he leaned his head on my shoulder and asked, "Are you a masochist?" And Margot's wide, weird eyes went deep. He seemed to ask it out of nowhere, but I knew where it came from. I was having a serious flirtation that was about to turn into an affair with Ronnie Moffat, who was married and whose idea of courting included talking about my body in conferences, not a lot, just comments on how I, quote, "look from behind," close quote, or how I pop out of a jacket. Disrespectful compliments that upset me, even if I acted like I didn't hear them, because that was my strategy then. Like my mother might say, "Act like you don't even hear it, like you are above it." But I wasn't above it. I was 24, and I just didn't know what to say. And I really didn't know what to say when Quinn Saunders put his head on me and asked me that. Afterwards, for days, I replayed the moment over in my mind. And in the replay, I shrugged him off my shoulder so hard his head jerked and I snapped, "No, I'm not a masochist. Are you a dormouse?" I replayed it so often that when I told somebody that's what happened, I didn't even feel like I was lying. He never said anything else like that because I didn't give him the chance. Still, even the sight of him nodding at me intimately from across a room or up close, taking my hand and greeting and rubbing one of his fingers inside my palm or even raising it to his lips before I pulled it away, was enough to make me feel loathing. Maybe that was normal, but I thought about him even when I didn't see him. I'd have imaginary arguments with him in my head. "And why?" I'd hear him whisper. "Why do you lie to yourself, Julie? Because you know I was right? Because you didn't have the courage to answer my question truthfully?" I even dreamed about him once, though I didn't realize the dream was about him until my therapist pointed it out. In the dream, I was shopping in an expensive store, a beautiful store with clothes that seemed so perfect they might change my life. But the salesman wouldn't let me try them on. He was dressed more like a businessman than a clerk, with a short, blocky body and wide eyes with a weird, fixed expression. He kept saying, "No, that isn't right for you at all. It doesn't suit you at all. You're too..." I kept reaching for a dress and he kept saying, "No." And I became furious and started screaming at him. He just widened his eyes and put his thumb out like he was inviting me to bite it. And I knew I shouldn't, but I did. I bit it so hard that in real life he would have gone to the hospital. But in the dream, he just stood there. I bit harder and harder. It was like I couldn't stop, like I was stuck. And he just looked at me like a cruel person might look at an animal in a trap, eyes fixed and glowing with greed, lips in a malign upturn, not at all like a smile. Interesting that my therapist thought Margot was folded into the Quinn figure with those wide, fixed eyes. The horrible salesman in my dream didn't look anything like Quinn. But he was Quinn, and once I realized it, it was obvious. Because Quinn really did that, stick his thumb in someone's face and tell them to bite it. An author, one of our first-time authors, a very young, smart Australian, who apparently just turned their back on him. I wasn't there for that, but it was at another event, a reading at an art gallery where there was also a band. Quinn was there and the writer was there, and I saw him casually wink at them from across the room and stick out his thumb. I was standing next to Margot and I said, "What is he doing?" And she told me about the first time. "That's really weird," I said, and she said, "Well, Quinn is weird." But when I woke up from the dream, I didn't just feel weird. I felt humiliated from inside my own head, powerless to affect anything, even though I was trying, biting as hard as I could. He didn't feel it, and I was just like a trapped animal, uselessly biting the trap. It was worse than anything I felt when I was with Ronnie or when we broke up. And so, when the petition got circulated, I signed it. It was a relief to sign it, to finally be able to do something. Hortense T. Before he got kicked out of the world, Quinn had this crazy idea that he was going to make a kind of fashion accessory, pins in the form of a single word that would be like labels people would wear to identify who they really were. He got the idea from a conversation with Caitlin. I guess she had told him he should be wearing pins on his lapel to warn people. Stuff like creep, manipulator, pervert. "And why did she say that?" I said, smiling. I'm sure I was smiling. "Well, you know Caitlin, she likes to tease. We like to tease. She's got an edge to her now, because lately her ego's taken a bit of a bruising. She would say it's her heart, not her ego, but if she exposed her heart to that character she claims to love, she is far more foolish than I imagine. But in this case, the tease caught my imagination. I like the idea of people wearing the pins. What stylish incongruity. So much more interesting than, for example, some t-shirt that claims the wearer is juicy or what have you. If you were to see a beautiful woman in the subway wearing a discreet piece of jewelry that said pig, it would be kind of a wonderful opposition, don't you think? Or a businessman labeled liar, or a handsome young player labeled fraud. Hmm? How many people, I wondered, would buy something like that for themselves? Ideally, he said, you wouldn't buy it for yourself. You would buy it as a gift for a friend to, to gently suggest to that friend what their personal challenge in life might be. It would be humorous, lighthearted, and yet have the spiritual benefit of acceptance. It was so absurd, I laughed. In my memory, I'm shoving French fries in my mouth, and there is loud music and tired waiters and glimpses of people rushing by on the street. The always background for our meetups, artificial joy, and other people's purpose. What an awful idea, I said, still laughing. Oh, but you're laughing, he said. Everybody laughs when I tell them about it. Because it's so awful, it's great. So perhaps awful is my word. Wouldn't you like to see me wear it? That insinuating, hyper-nuanced voice. For that alone, I understood why people hated him. But he was just too perfect for me, too perfectly himself to hate. Like this runty demon dandy at a conference table in hell. That was actually an impromptu vision that popped into my head about him while I was riding the subway one day. Quinn is a demon with a scabby tail sticking out of his stylish suit at an infernal business meeting with the devil, sitting at a table with other bigger demons, the big guys all boasting of their evils, chortling about war, torture, famine, rape, racism, child abuse, all of it. And you? Demanded the devil, looking at Quinn. What about you? Do you have something to show besides the usual subtle torment and casual humiliation? With a flourish, Quinn would produce his absurd insult pins, and the devil would thunder, Are you kidding me? All you can come up with is hurt feelings? Hurt feelings, yes, always, Quinn would reply, but not only. This is hurt that comes as friendship, as spiritual substance, as humor and harmless charade, dime store monster mask, pure Halloween party evil. And the devil would say, Go on. These pins are something people might accept and wear, might treat as fun. I'm a narcissist. Isn't that fun? I'm cruel. It's so little and fun. I'm a racist. It's a joke. And it's those little things, the little fun things that eat their way in. Big, scary things like rape and murder, absolutely 100%, they're very important, but they're obvious. Even the least intelligent know they're bad. Hardly anyone willingly lets those things in. But a little joke, a little pinchy flirt, a decorative pin that a friend might give you, an acceptance of your flaws that makes your flaws actually kind of fun. That's easy. You let it in, and it's the kind of thing that eats away at your tender feelings about yourself, your tedious sense of right and wrong, of personal balance and self-esteem. The longer it goes on, subtly and quietly, in comes confusion, depression, nameless contempt, and anger. All the things that can slowly destroy a human being. The devil's eyes would light up. He'd chortle with pleasure. The demons would burst into applause. The whole idea almost made me laugh out loud until I noticed the shank. That shank is the whole reason I remember being on the subway when I had the amusing Quinn as demon fantasy. I was about to laugh when I saw a teenager pull it out of her pocket and pass it to another girl, who then looked up and nodded across the car at a boy standing with a group of boys, who then fanned out among us. That was so not funny. The weapon was past maybe 5 inches from my face. The kids moved through the car saying weird things and vaguely menacing writers. I think I saw money being handed over, but it happened so fast and no one said anything, so I'm not sure. I got off at the next stop and somebody shouted, There goes money. Which in the moment reminded me of something else about Quinn. He gave me money sometimes, literally. He would just hand it to me if he knew I was hard up. $50 here or there, which was inappropriate, especially when I was working for him. but I took it and I never felt sorry. Why should I? I needed it. That's it.
Hi, so we'll be doing a brief Q&A. Where can we start?
I could start with something
Great.
like what you were saying about my mind, my saying my mind isn't too big. That actually, I'm not especially talking about my mind being small. I mean, I was, but I don't think any human being's mind is big enough to take in the world. I mean, we see things every day. We don't think about them maybe, but we see things every day. We can't take in all of it. It's impossible. Like I once heard that being talked about by these computer AI people. I mean, just really basically computer nerds. One of them was named Stephen Wolfram, and the other one was Lex Friedman. It's a podcast. I've become kind of fascinated by the AI horrifying thing, but one of them was talking about that, how human beings were, as you put it, computationally bounded, and that our vision of the universe is utterly limited. Especially because we can only think and see sequentially, and we can only see a really small piece of any given thing we're looking at, and that's really true. So that's what I meant by that. I mean, it's just not possible. So anyway, just I wasn't being especially humble. I was just being realistic.
Where else? Who else has a question for us here? Well, I guess I can toss in a question. So in your short stories, I noticed that often you move in and out of time like very seamlessly from sort of the present moment to memory or history. And at the moment, I'm thinking of the last story in Don't Cry about the adoption, where there's just so much moving around. And I'm wondering, in the act of writing, is that kind of a contiguous progress forward in the writing process, or is it sort of intercut later, or how do you think about that?
It's a continuous process. It's usually a memory or reference to the past usually just makes sense to me there, that the character would be thinking about that, or that is a part of the story that I want to bring forward then. But it does happen just kind of in one, like I'm moving forward usually.
Great.
Hi, I was rereading your story Tiny Smiling Daddy the other day, and I was thinking about your endings, because the ending of that story feels just surprising, but also just so right, like it feels so perfect. And I wonder, when you're coming to an ending, is that something that you're thinking of earlier on in your story, or do they come on at the end? Do they tend to change, or yeah, I'm curious how you come to your endings.
Well, thank you about that. I don't remember the ending of that. He was thinking about it. He was thinking about his own father, right?
Yeah. He sits down next to his wife, and his wife just moves further down the couch, and that's it.
Yeah, she rubs his shoulders a little bit, and then okay. Well, it's kind of all of the above. Sometimes the ending is the first thing in my mind, and I'm writing towards that. And other times I don't really know what the ending is going to be. And sometimes I do have an idea what the ending is going to be, but it does change sometimes. So yeah, all of those things.
Okay, I think we have time for just a couple more.
Hi.
Hello.
How do you deal with self-doubt in the writing process and handling sort of confidence in your words as like a young writer?
Well, lately, not very well. Actually, strangely, I handled it better when I was young, I think. I'm not sure why, but I've always, anybody with any sense says that. But yes, I find it, I find it very difficult sometimes, like kind of almost paralyzingly so. Like I remember once I said to somebody, my writing process is me trying to do something while in my imagination somebody is riding a truck alongside me going, that's stupid, that's ridiculous, nobody would want to read that. Uh, it's a terrible like inner voice that I think probably, I'm sure a lot of people have. And eventually it goes away, or I stop paying attention, or I give it a cookie, or occasionally when I was young, I would be like, yeah, it's going to be terrible, it's going to be really awful, and it's just going to be what these squalid thoughts and feelings I have, and that's what it is, and probably nobody will read it anyway. But that became harder to do once I knew people were going to read it. It's almost like you have to get caught in a wave of the thing. Like there comes a certain point where my self-confidence is almost not necessary. It's almost like I catch a sort of feeling and I just really want to describe this thing that I'm trying to describe. It's almost like the excitement of doing it becomes greater than the confidence. It almost doesn't matter if it's good or not. It's just I want to do it. So that's the best thing. It's hard to talk myself out of it rationally, but if I sit there long enough, that moment will come.
You say that as humans, we're kind of sentenced to not to think small because we think sequentially and
Not
only
that.
see part,
Yeah.
or for other reasons. But do you think there's any alternative? Because I remember being young, there were 3, and I definitely didn't think sequentially then. And I'm just wondering if there could be another way of growing up or being socialized where we could keep our minds more bigger.
Oh, I definitely think so. I mean, many people have very capacious minds. A sequential, that's only part of it. I mean, that's one small part of the thing those guys were talking about. They were talking about, like, for example, I'm in a room with a lot of people right now. I can only see, I can see what you look like in pieces, really. I don't even see that. I see small images of how you guys are. I don't know what you're thinking. I don't know your life history. You don't actually know very much about me. You're hearing a very limited, limited information that I'm giving you. There's a lot of information in my voice, in your voice, in my gestures right now that you're taking in on some level, but it's a lot of complexity. Or, this room that we're in right now, or our own bodies. There's creatures inside of our own bodies, like living and doing all kinds of stuff. There's stuff on our eyelashes. There are actually mites that live on our eyelashes sometimes. We don't know. Can't think about that all the time. There's stuff in this material, this water bottle it's got a whole world of life inside of it. That's not even, I don't even notice it. I just see it plastic with light on it. Or the ground underneath our feet, or all the stuff. We're living in an incredibly complex world filled with phenomena that it's just not possible. Even for a person with a brilliant and large mind and sensitive, we just can't. But I think you're talking about more in terms of open-mindedness and, using what we have and allowing ourselves to be as receptive as possible. Yeah, I definitely think that's possible. And I think that that's what really good writers are. That's what they're at least trying to do.
Cool. Thank you.
We read recently a critique of the personal essay, which instead praised your work and Somebody with a Little Hammer as kind of the pinnacle of what the personal essay could be, because it was unsentimental. And I'm struck by that, because if I read some of your essays, I wouldn't particularly use the term unsentimental. From Merv Emre, she wrote this piece and wondered what you made of that claim. If that was something that you strive for in your writing, is to avoid sentimentality, or how you think about that in your essay writing or your fiction.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who've said that. I agree with you. I don't think I'm especially unsentimental. I think that sometimes people use the word sentimental wrongly. Sentimental is usually meant to express false feeling or artificially jacked up feeling. But I think, sentiment is very important. I mean, content is really important in writing, whether it's an essay or a piece of writing. It's without that, it would almost be dead. So no, I've never tried to particularly excise feeling, and I may be guilty of sentimentality sometimes. I remember when I was trying to write about horses, I was learning to ride horses, and my language at first when I described them was much too big, and I think it might still have been too big. It was like the feelings that I got were riding a horse. I remember one in particular, which I know I wrote about in this book, was I normally I was pretty stiff and uncomfortable. They tended to scare me. I was scared of riding. I enjoyed it sometimes, but it wasn't a natural thing for me to do. But I was on this horse once, and she was just a lesson horse. I didn't have a strong bond with this animal at all. And I suddenly, one day, I felt this feeling. My leg was on her, and I just felt this soft, round feeling. That's the best I can do to describe it. This is softness and roundness. And it felt wonderful. And I know it was real because the person who was giving me the lesson, I said, I think I felt her. And she said, yeah, I saw that. And I said, how did you see it? And she said, the mare's eyes got soft. And when I described that to other people who are serious writers, they said, sometimes they don't get that. And sometimes they get it for like half an hour while they're writing at a gallop or something. But it was such a subtle, soft feeling, but strong at the same time, but very gentle. And it was hard for me to, like, my tendency was to go for more dramatic language to describe the experience. And I don't think it was accurate. So, I mean, you could say perhaps I was somewhat sentimental. I don't know. I'm not sure. I can't evaluate it like that right now. But if you don't mind my going on about that subject a little, I've noticed writing students tend to be really scared of that. They tend to be scared of being too emotional or expressing too much emotion. And they always say, well, I don't want to be sentimental. But sometimes they go too far, and they don't realize it's like a human experience. If they're trying to write about a human experience, it's a mistake to excise emotion, and they don't need to be so worried about it. If it's too much, they can always pare it down, but it's nothing to be afraid of.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.